Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. We've got the one and only Jeff Stein in the show. Some big movement in terms of Biden's stimulus package, so he's going to break down where all of that stands. We also have Alex Garawara. He's with the new Google Employees Union, so we're going to talk to him about that and why it's so significant. But we got to start with the big news of the day, which is that President Trump has now officially been impeached for a second time.
That's right. So let's put the vote total up there on the screen. You can see that 10 Republicans ended up joining Democrats in order to impeach President Trump at 217 to 192. And I was just telling Krystal and I have now officially presided over, in terms of covered, half of the impeachments in American history, which is a fun little tidbit. Congratulations to everybody. Never thought I would live to see the day to cover 2 impeachments in the same presidential term. But that's where we are. Of course, what we're really focusing on here is the GOP support for impeachment. Let's throw up the names there on the screen. Many of them will look familiar to you. We talked about them. But the major surprise, Krystal, was Tom Rice, a very conservative district in South Carolina. He put out a statement yesterday, let's put that up there on the screen, in which he explained his impeachment vote. He's saying the president has not addressed the nation to ask for calm. He has not visited the injured and grieving. He has not offered condolences. Yesterday, in a press briefing at the border, his comments were perfectly appropriate. I have backed this president through thick and thin for 4 years. I campaigned and voted for him twice, but this is an utter failure, is inexcusable. Tom Rice's one was really the one that caught everybody off guard. But I think it does highlight some of the dynamics that I told you all yesterday, which is that if you can only get 10 votes in the House of Representatives, how are you going to get 17 votes in the U.S. Senate?
Yeah.
It's a very big question. And it's one there. Look, the dynamics obviously are different. Majority of the House caucus did object to the certification of the election results. They are all up for re-election every 2 years, so they would face much. I can tell you Tom Rice's career is probably over. For the rest of them, maybe half will lose, half will probably stay just because they're from different types of districts. But when you translate it over to the Senate dynamics, it's hard not to see a very similar reality. Yeah,
so there's a couple ways to look at this. Yeah. First, to start with Tom Rice, just to give you a sense of how shocking this was to people who know South Carolina and have covered him and covered that district, et cetera. After he cast that vote, they were so shocked that they actually reached out to his office to see if it was a mistake. I mean, that's how unusual this was, and how outside of the mold of most of the votes, which came from more swing districts, like Jamie Herrera Butler, someone we've actually had on Rising. She narrowly won re-election this year. I think she represents a district, a Biden district, one of those unusual ones that actually split. Liz Cheney, I mean, look, now it seems very obvious because she took such a forward stance on this, but she's going to face a lot of political trouble.
Well, she's already being called for a primary by the freshman reps in Wyoming. I mean, Wyoming is Trump country.
I think it was Jim Jordan who's calling for her to be removed from leadership. So she's facing a lot of consequences. And I think there are 2 ways that you can look at this vote. On the one hand, 10 is not a lot of people. I mean, just on the numbers, that's not a whole lot of people. And actually, the White House reportedly yesterday was expecting as many as 20.
That's right.
So this is half of even what their sort of scenario was. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is this is actually the most bipartisan impeachment that we've had since Nixon.
So apparently, because Nixon wasn't even impeached, this was the most bipartisan impeachment in history.
Right.
Even Andrew Johnson, which is kind of incredible.
So it also, having now covered half of the impeachments in modern history, there is a marked contrast here between the last time around. First of all, even people like Kevin McCarthy, in his comments and remarks yesterday, he didn't really defend the president. No, not many. There were very few who were explicitly defending the president's actions. More of the objections were like, he's going to be out of office soon. We got to bring the country together. There were process disagreements, all of those were more, which is a dramatic difference from last time around when there was a, lockstep. Every Republican, save for Mitt Romney, was on board, was singing the same tune. They were defiant. They completely rejected the idea that this had any basis whatsoever. So even with the numbers being relatively small, he's not getting that much cover, even from these people in the House. You rightfully point out that the Senate dynamic is a little bit different. And if you compare it to the votes to certify the election, raise objections and whatever after all this happened last Wednesday, you had far more in the House
Hundreds.
Who went? What was it? 100? I mean, 2/3. I think 2/3 of the caucus went along with rejecting the electoral certification, even on the day when their lives had been in jeopardy from this insurrection in the Capitol, attempted insurrection. Whereas in the Senate, you just had 6 or 7 who continued to press forward. So there are different dynamics there. And then the one other thing that is different is McConnell.
Yes.
So in the House, Liz Cheney doesn't have a lot of sway. She's not McConnell has his caucus. He really has a lot of loyalty within the caucus.
Yes.
And people really do follow his lead. And he has a lot to offer, frankly. Like if people need something for their district or they want their buddy to be a judge or whatever, he has goodies that he can offer if he wants to get people to vote to convict. Now, I think that your analysis is correct. That if you look at 10 people in the House, not a good sign for what's going to happen in the Senate. You're going to be able to get almost double that in a much smaller caucus and body in the Senate. I think it's unlikely. But it is important to keep in mind, first of all, that historical context, that this is actually a remarkably bipartisan vote, number one. And number two, that the dynamics in the Senate are very distinct from the House, so you don't want to read too much into this vote. Ultimately.
That's right. Look, I mean, it's a very different situation than Ukraine. I should also note the correct vote count, it was 232-197. We didn't have the full number of votes there on the graphic. 232 also, I believe, the same amount of Electoral College votes that Trump won, so kind of an interesting parallel there. There's a lot that's going on here. Yesterday, Trump, for the very first time, released a video for another audience of one, if you will. You know, a lot of people go on Fox and they want to talk directly to the president. And sometimes they break the fourth wall and they're like, "Mr. President, please pardon my husband," or something like that. In this particular case, it's the first time Trump has ever had to play conciliatory on the public stage to somebody else, because Mitch McConnell put the statement out yesterday, not ruling out his vote for impeachment. He said, "I'm undecided on the vote." And everyone was like, "See, he didn't say he was going to vote." His people were like, "See, he's not saying he will vote for it." And I'm like, "Yeah, but he didn't rule it out," which is a massive deal, right? So Trump put out this statement yesterday, very conciliatory, scripted, from the Resolute desk, trying to calm everything down. Let's take a listen to what he said.
I want to be very clear. I unequivocally condemn the violence that we saw last week. Violence and vandalism have absolutely no place in our country and no place in our movement. Making America great again has always been about defending the rule of law, supporting the men and women of law enforcement, and upholding our nation's most sacred traditions and values. Mob violence goes against everything I believe in and everything our movement stands for. No true supporter of mine could ever endorse political violence. No true supporter of mine could ever disrespect law enforcement or our great American flag. No true supporter of mine could ever threaten or harass their fellow Americans. If you do any of these things, you are not supporting our movement, you are attacking it, and you are attacking our country.
Well, a little bit too late, too little too late, but it's pretty obvious what that is all about. That's basically Mitch McConnell, please do not impeach me. And it's the same. But here's the thing. It gives them the cover that they need, right? Because they're like, look, he denounced it. He told his people before the inauguration not to do it. All of that. So this is another reason why I think it is enough. Now, look. The fact that they took his Twitter account may be a blessing to him, because he can't actually just jump on Twitter and kind of screw up the statement that he just put out there. It might actually be a great validator for the case of so many of his hundreds of aides who have been like, I wish he would stop damn tweeting, just because of how much damage it does. Maybe an alternative view of what the Trump presidency could look like, but probably never would have been there in the first place if he hadn't had it. You can see there that he gave what he needed to. I'm not going to do any new tone stuff. Look, it's fake. And it's
obviously it's BS.
Fake, scripted, all of that. But it's enough, I think. Not for McConnell necessarily, although I do think ultimately that might be the case, but for a lot of the senators who are going to be on the fence in order to say, look, he said it before the inauguration, he said it right afterwards, no true supporter of mine, and all of that. I'm not saying you should take that at its face value, but that's what the calculus behind the
Lindsey
video was.
Graham is already out there saying, see when you ask the president to calm the waters and cool the temperature down, he goes out there and does the right thing. Look, it goes without saying, like, this is BS. Look at the tone from last week when he called them patriots and was like, I love you and you're very special. That's the way he really feels about it. And let me also say, look, if you're out there saying the country is being taken from you, the election was stolen, it's the end of the republic, you gotta fight. It seems a little silly to be that, but you can't break any windows over it. My goodness, I can't imagine. So it's absurd. But he's doing what he thinks he needs to do to keep himself from getting convicted in the Senate. And that is a sign that he read that statement. Yeah. That is a sign that he takes this seriously and he sees it as a real threat to his post-presidency ambitions, because his whole plan was to play Willie or won't he for 4 years, turn it all into a reality show, keep control over the Republican Party, play all the games that he's been playing for years, only now from the outside where he's way more comfortable and doesn't have any real responsibilities. This was going to be a great time for him.
Yes.
He almost had, if he could have just kept his mouth shut after the election and been like a halfway, not even halfway, like a 10% normal person,
he'd be fine.
He was all set to go. Yeah. Elite America hadn't abandoned him. All his deals were still in place. He could have gone out and done his media venture and been out on Twitter and all this stuff. It was all set up and there for him. And now he's facing potential bankruptcy. He's facing potential legal liability, and he is still in danger of facing an actual ban on him running for office again, which is a key piece of what he was planning to use to keep the focus and the spotlight and the attention on him where he always wants it. But look, the overall picture is this. Let's throw this polling up on the screen. The Republican Party stands with still Donald Trump. I mean, they don't back impeachment. They don't back, if McConnell is going to go forward with impeachment, removing him from office. You can say 64% of Republicans say they support Trump's recent behavior even. 57% said Trump should be the 2024 GOP candidate. A lot has been made of the fact, I think rightfully so, that in poll after poll, if you ask people who they're more loyal to, Donald Trump or the Republican Party, they say Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So this is the state of affairs that they're facing.
That's what I tried to lay out. I'm like, I understand. Like, you can look from the outside and say, like, oh, well, these senators. I'm like, no. Like, he is has so much loyalty amongst the Republican, not just the base, the Republican Party, which is increasingly a shrinking thing, which I'm going to get to in my radar and has very little prospects. But as you said, if he had not done this, he would have been the kingmaker of all kingmakers. There was never a Republican president in modern history as popular as Donald Trump amongst Republican voters. H.W. Bush, nobody cared what he had to say in the next election. Maybe Reagan, right? Okay, so back to 1988 or whatever. H.W. Bush, nobody cared after they threw him out. George W. Bush, his endorsement would be an anti-endorsement. Whereas Trump, if Trump comes out against you, you're dead in a primary. And if he comes out for you, you're going to do really, really well. And he had that dynamic going for him. It's still there, but on the elite level, with McConnell, with Toomey, and so much more, he's basically fracturing off, I would say, about 20 to 30% of the Republican Party, people who are more upwardly mobile, maybe more educated, more the suburbanite, like more culturally conservative, suburbanite tax policy type voter. They are done. I think they really are done.
Yeah, I think so too.
With a lot of what's happening here. And that just leaves you, 33% of the country? I mean, good luck. You're not going to govern anything with that. And so now he's their king, but it's not a great kingdom to have.
Yeah, that's the thing, is they're really screwed. Yeah. No matter what they do. If they vote to convict and to ban him from running for office again, then you're going to face the complete wrath and potential splintering from that side. If you don't, no matter what they do, I think the Republican Party as it exists today has become anathema to, polite society. Every elite in America, they're going to have trouble holding on to any more of their corporate contributions. Georgia is exactly right. Texas, probably one full presidential election cycle behind Georgia in terms of the trajectory that they're on. So, yeah, that's the future that they're facing down. There really is no way out of the bind right now. Even if they manage to muddle through and keep this coalition more or less together, you're going to have enough erosion, couple points of depression, couple points of party switching that it really damages your prospects. And otherwise, they would have been set up historically. The opposition party does very well in midterm elections. They would have been set up for success. Right now, I think they're pretty screwed.
I think that's right.
We're going to tell you what's on our radar, so that's next.